Chapter 2, Part 1 of Life of Chopin by Franz Liszt. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Life of Chopin by Franz Liszt. Translated by Martha Walker Cook. Chapter 2, Part 1. National character of the Polonaise, Oginski, Meseder, Weber, Chopin. His Polonaise in F sharp minor, Polonaise, Fantasy. It must not be supposed that the tortured aberrations of feeling to which we have just alluded ever injured the harmonic tissue in the works of Chopin. On the contrary, they only render it a more curious subject for analysis. Such eccentricities rarely occur in his more generally known and admired compositions. His polonaises, which are less studied than they merit, on the account of the difficulties presented by their perfect execution, are to be classed among its highest inspirations. They never remind us of the mincing and affected polonaises a la Pompadour, which our orchestras have introduced into the ballrooms, our virtuosi in concerts, or of those to be found in our parlor repertories, filled, as they invariably are, with hackneyed collections of music marked by insipidity and mannerism. His polonaises, characterized by an energetic rhythm, galvanize and electrify the torpor of indifference. The most noble traditional feelings of ancient Poland are embodied in them. The firm resolve and calm gravity of its men of other days breathe through these compositions. Generally a martial character, courage and daring are rendered with that simplicity of expression said to be a distinct trait of this warlike people. They bring vividly before the imagination the ancient Poles as we find them described in their chronicles, gifted with powerful organizations, subtle intellects, indomitable courage, and earnest piety, mingled with high-born courtesy and a gallantry which never deserted them, whether on the eve of the battle, during its exciting course, in the triumph of victory, or amidst the gloom of defeat. So inherent was this gallantry and chivalric courtesy in their nature, that in spite of the restraint which their customs, resembling those of their neighbours and enemies, the infidels of Stamboul, induced them to exercise upon their women, confining them in the limits of domestic life, and always holding them under legal wardship, they still manifest themselves in their annals, in which they have glorified and immortalized queens who were saints, vassals who became queens, beautiful subjects for whose sake some periled, while others lost crowns, a terrible Sforza, an intriguing Ariquin, and a coquettish Gonzaga. The Poles of olden times united a manly firmness with their peculiar chivalric devotion to the subjects of their love. A characteristic example of this may be seen in the letters of John Sobieski to his wife. They were dictated in the face of the standards of the Crescent, numerous as the ears in a grain field, tender and devoted as is their character. Such traits caught a singular and imposing hue from the grave deportment of these men, so dignified that they might almost be accused of pomposity. It was next to impossible that they should not contract a taste for this stateliness, when we consider that they had almost always before them the most exquisite type of gravity of manner in the followers of Islam, whose qualities they appreciated and appropriated, even while engaged in repelling their invasions. Like the infidel, they knew how to preface their acts by an intelligent deliberation, so that the device of Prince Boleslas of Pomerania was always present to them: first weigh it, then dare; Erster wäg's, dann wag's. Such deliberation imparted a kind of stately pride to their movements, which it left them in possession of an ease and freedom of spirit accessible to the lightest cares of tenderness, to the most trivial interests of the passing hour, to the most transient feelings of the heart, as it made part of their code of honor to make those who interfered with them in their more tender interests pay dearly for it. So they knew how to beautify life, and, better still, they knew how to love those who embellished it, to revere those who rendered it precious to them. Their chivalric heroism was sanctioned by their grave and haughty dignity, and intelligent and premeditated conviction added the force of reason to the energy of impulsive virtue. Thus they have succeeded in winning the admiration of all ages, of all minds, even that of their most determined adversaries. They were characterized by qualities rarely found together, the description of which would appear almost paradoxical: reckless wisdom, daring prudence, and fanatic fatalism. The most marked and celebrated historic manifestation of these properties is to be found in the expedition of Sobieski, when he saved Vienna, and gave a mortal blow to the Ottoman Empire, which was at last conquered in the long struggle, sustained on both sides, with so much prowess and glory, with so much mutual deference between opponents, as magnanimous in their truces, as irreconcilable in their combats. While listening to some of the polonaises of Chopin, we can almost catch the firm, nay, the more than firm, the heavy, resolute tread of men bravely facing all the bitter injustice which the most cruel and relentless destiny can offer, with the manly pride of unblenching courage. The progress of the music suggests to our imagination such magnificent groups as were designed by Paul Veronese, robed in the rich costume of the days long past. We see passing at intervals before us brocades of gold, velvets, damasked satins, silvery soft and flexible sables, hanging sleeves gracefully thrown back upon the shoulders, embossed sabres, boots yellow as gold or red with trampled blood, sashes with long and undulating fringes, close chemisettes, rustling trains, stomatures embroidered with pearls, headdresses glittering with rubies or leafy with emeralds, light slippers rich with amber, gloves perfumed with the luxurious attar from the harems. From the faded background of times long past, these vivid groups start forth. Gorgeous carpets from Persia lie at their feet, filigreed furniture from Constantinople stands around. All is marked by the sumptuous prodigality of the magnates who drew, in ruby goblets embossed with medallions, wine from the fountains of Tokay, and showed their fleet Arabian steeds with silver, who surmounted all their escutcheons with the same crown which the fate of an election might render a royal one, and which, causing them to despise all other titles, was alone worn as ensign of their glorious equality. Those who have seen the Polonaise danced even as late as the beginning of the present century, declare that its style has changed so much, that it is now almost impossible to divine its primitive character, as very few national dances have succeeded in preserving their racy originality. We may imagine, when we take into consideration the changes which have occurred, to what a degree this has degenerated. The Polonaise is without rapid movements, without any true steps in the artistic sense of word, intended rather for display than for the exhibition of seductive grace. So we may readily conceive it must lose all its haughty importance, its pompous self sufficiency, when the dancers are deprived of the accessories necessary to enable them to animate its simple form by dignified yet vivid gestures, by appropriate and expressive pantomime, and when the costume peculiarly fitted for it is no longer worn. It has indeed become decidedly monotonous, a mere circulating promenade, exciting but little interest, unless we could see it danced by some of the old regime who still wear the ancient costume, or listen to their animated descriptions of it. We can form no conception of the numerous incidents, the scenic pantomime, which once rendered it so effective. By rare exception, this dance was designed to exhibit the men, to display manly beauty, to set off noble and dignified deportment, martial yet courtly. Do not these two epithets almost define the Polish character? In the original, the very name of the dance is masculine. It is only in consequence of a misconception that it has been translated in other tongues into the feminine gender. Those who have never seen the contours worn, it is a kind of a occidental caftan, as it is the robe of the Orientals, modified to suit the customs of an active life, unfettered by the stagnant resignation taught by fatalism. A sort of ferdegy, often trimmed with fur, forcing the wearer to make a frequent movement susceptible of grace and coquetry, by which the flowing sleeves are thrown backward, can scarcely imagine the bearing, the slow bending, the quick rising, the fineness of delicate pantomime displayed by the ancients, as they defiled in a polonaise, as though in a military parade, not suffering their fingers to remain idle, but sometimes occupying them in playing with a long moustache, sometimes with the handle of the sword. Both moustache and sword were essential parts of the costume, and were indeed objects of vanity with all ages. Diamonds and sapphires frequently sparkled upon the arms, worn suspended from belts of cashmere, or from sashes of silk embroidered with gold, displaying to advantage forms always slightly corpulent. The moustache often veiled, without quite hiding, some scar, far more effective than the most brilliant array of jewels. The dress of men rivaled that of the women in the luxury of the material worn, in the value of the precious stones, and in the variety of vivid colors. This love of adornment is also found among the Hungarians. Footnote: the Hungarian costume, worn by Prince Nicholas Esterhazy at the coronation of George IV., is still remembered in England. It was valued at several millions of florins. End of footnote. As may be seen in their buttons made of jewels, the rings forming a necessary part of their dress, the broad clasps for the neck, the aigrettes and plumes adorning the cap made of velvet of some brilliant hue. To know how to take off, to put on, to maneuver the cap with all possible grace, constituted almost an art. During the progress of a polonaise, this became an object of especial remark, because the cavalier of the leading pair, as commandant of the file, gave the mute word of command, which was immediately obeyed and imitated by the rest of the train. The master of the house in which the ball was given always opened it himself by leading off in this dance. His partner was selected neither for her beauty nor youth. The most highly honoured lady present was always chosen. This phalanx, by whose evolutions every fete was commenced, was not formed only of the young. It was composed of the most distinguished, as well as of the most beautiful. A grand review, a dazzling exhibition of all the distinction present, was offered as the highest pleasure of the festival. After the host, came next in order the guests of greatest consideration, who, choosing their partners, some from friendship, some from policy, or from desire of advancement, some from love, followed closely his steps. His task was far more complicated one than it is at present. He was expected to conduct the files under his guidance through a thousand capricious meanderings, through long suites of apartments, lined by guests who were to take a later part in the brilliant cortege. They liked to be conducted through distant galleries, through the parterres of illuminated gardens, through the groves of shrubbery, where distant echoes of their music alone reached the ear, which, as if in revenge, greeted them with redoubled sound and blowing of trumpets upon their return to the principal saloon. As the spectators, ranged like rows of edges along the route, were continually changing, and never ceased for a moment to observe all their movements, the dancers never forgot the dignity of bearing and address which won for them the admiration of women and excited the jealousy of men. Vain and joyous, the host would have deemed himself wanting in courtesy to his guests, had he not evinced to them, which he did sometimes with a piquant naivete, the pride he felt in seeing himself surrounded by persons so illustrious and partisans so noble, all striving through the splendour of their attire chosen to visit him, to show their high sense of honour in which they held him. Guided by him in their first circuit, they were led through long windings, where unexpected turns, views, and openings had been arranged beforehand to cause surprise, where architectural deceptions, decorations, and shifting scenes had been studiously adapted to increase the pleasure of the festival. In any monument or inscription fitted for the occasion lay upon a long line of route, from which some complimentary homage might be drawn to the most valiant or the most beautiful. The honors were gracefully done by the host. The more unexpected the surprises arranged for these excursions, the more imagination evinced in their invention, the louder were the applauses from the younger part of the society, the more ardent the exclamations of delight, and silvery sounds of merry laughter greeted pleasantly the ears of the conductor in chief, who, having thus succeeded in achieving his reputation, became a privileged Corpheus, a leader par excellence. If he had already attained a certain age, he was greeted on his return from such circuits by frequent deputations of young ladies, who came, in the name of all present, to thank and congratulate him. Through their vivid descriptions, these pretty wanderers excited the curiosity of the guests, and increased the eagerness for the formation of succeeding polonaises among those who, though they did not make part of the procession, still watched its passage in motionless attention, as if gazing upon the flashing line of light of some brilliant meteor. In this land of aristocratic democracy, the numerous dependents of the great seigniorial houses, too poor indeed to take part in the fete, yet only excluded from it by their own volition, all, however noble, some even more noble than their lords, being all present, it was considered highly desirable to dazzle them, and this glowing chain of rainbow hued and gorgeous light, like an immense serpent with its glittering rings, sometimes wreathed its linked folds, sometimes uncoiled its entire length to display its brilliancy, through the whole line of undulating animated surface, in the most vivid scintillations, accompanying the shifting hues with the silvery sound of chains of gold ringing with muffled bells, with the rustling of the heavy sweep of gorgeous damasks, and with the dragging of the jewelled swords upon the floor, the murmuring sound of many voices announced the approach of this animated, varied, and glittering life stream. But the genius of hospitality, never deficient in a high born courtesy, and which, even while preserving the touching simplicity of primitive manners, inspired in Poland all the refinements of the most advanced state of civilization, how could it be exiled from the details of a dance so eminently polished? After the host had, by inaugurating the fete, rendered due homage to all those who were present, any one of his guests had the right to claim his place with the lady whom he had honoured by his choice. The new claimant, clapping his hands, to arrest for a moment the ever moving cortege, bowed before the partner of the host, begging her graciously to accept the change, while the host, from whom she had been taken, made the same appeal to the lady next in course. This example was followed by the whole train, constantly changing partners whenever a new cavalier claimed the honour of leading the one first chosen by the host. The ladies remained in the same succession during the whole course, while, on the contrary, as the gentlemen continuously replaced each other. He who had commenced the dance would, in its progress, become the last, if not indeed entirely excluded before its close. Each cavalier, who placed himself in turn at the head of a column, tried to surpass his predecessors in the novelty of the combinations of his opening, in the complications of the windings through which he led the expectant cortege; and this course, even when restricted to a single salon, might be made remarkable by the designing of graceful arabesques, or the involved tracing of enigmatical ciphers. He made good his claim to the place he had solicited, and displayed his skill by inventing close, complicated, and inextricable figures, by describing them with so much certainty and accuracy, that the living ribbon, turned and twisted as it might be, was never broken in the loosing of its weathered knots, and by so leading, that no confusion or graceless jostling should result from the complicated torsion. The succeeding couples, who had only to follow the figures already given, and thus continue the impulsion, were not permitted to drag themselves lazily and listlessly through the parquet. The step was rhythmic, cadenced, and undulating, the whole form swayed by graceful wavings and harmonious balancings. They were careful never to advance with too much haste, nor to replace each other as if driven on by some urgent necessity. So they glided, like swans descending a tranquil stream, their flexile forms swayed by the ebb and swell of unseen and gentle waves. Sometimes the gentleman offered the right, sometimes the left hand to his partner, touching only the points of her fingers, or clasping the slight hand within his own. He passed now to her right, now to her left, without yielding the snowy treasure. These complicated movements, being instantaneously imitated by every pair, ran, like an electric shiver, through the whole length of the gigantic serpent. Although apparently occupied and absorbed by the multiplied manoeuvres, the cavalier yet found time to bend to his lady and whisper sweet flatteries in her ear, if she were young; if young no longer, to repose confidence, to urge requests, or to repeat to her the news of the hour. Then, haughtily raising himself, he would make the metal of his arms ring, caress his thick moustache, giving to all his features an expression so vivid that the lady was forced to respond by the animations of her own countenance. Thus, it was no hackneyed and senseless promenade which they executed; it was, rather, a parade in which the whole splendour of the society was exhibited, gratified with its own admiration, conscious of its own elegance, brilliancy, nobility, and courtesy. It was a constant display of lustre, its glory, its renown. Men grew grey in camps, or in the strife of courtly eloquence; generals more often seen in the cuirass than in the robes of peace; prelates and persons high in church, dignitaries of state, aged senators, warlike palatines, ambitious castellans, were the partners who were expected, welcomed, disputed, and sought for, by the youngest, gayest, and most brilliant women present. Honour and glory rendered ages equal, and caused years to be forgotten in this dance. Nay, more, they gave an advantage even over love. It was while listening to the animated descriptions of the almost forgotten evolutions and dignified capabilities of this truly national dance, from the lips of those who never abandoned the ancient supine and contours, and who still wore their hair closely cut round their temples, as it had been worn by their ancestors, that we first fully understand in what a high degree this haughty nation possessed the innate instinct of its own exhibition, and how entirely it had succeeded, through its natural grace and genius, in poetizing its love of ostentation, by draping it in charms of noble emotions, and wrapping around it glittering robes of martial glory. End of chapter 2, part 1. Read by Lambda.